Hello, everyone, and welcome on Coach QC's podcast. In today's episode, I have the immense joy to have Richard Carter from Norse, Wyoming. Richard is a rancher. I've been following Richard on Instagram, and I've literally loved his content. And we've been trying to set this interview for quite a while, and eventually we managed to do it. So I'm very happy. Richard, thank you and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad we were able to finally connect.
Yeah, me too. Could you please tell us more about yourself and maybe how you became a rancher and how?
I was uh I was kind of born into it. So I'm a third generation rancher. My family's ranch. Um so I grew up doing this kind of work, and then kind of over the last 15 years, we sought to insulate ourselves from the commodity market because we thought it was unfair, and it's such a gamble. I mean, your input costs in ranching pretty much stay the same. Year after year, they tend to go up, but it's such a gamble as far as, what you're going to get paid. It's the ups and the downs of the commodity market. So we sought to kind of insulate ourselves from the market. So we got into the meat industry, started selling into the wholesale industry. COVID was kind of a disaster. We had lots of working with lots of restaurants, and then everybody with COVID, everybody's got back to us and said, hey, we're just not opening. So we pivoted and then moved into the direct consumer market base, and have kind of been doing that ever since, and constantly working to figure out how does a small scale rancher make it going direct to consumer, or we're still trying to solve for how do we insulate ourselves from the commodity market and all the challenges in between. Um, Over the past, I don't know, I wouldn't say we've regenerative ranching. That's an interesting term because it's really not defined. I think the closest way you could define it is, operating closer to nature, and then everything in the spectrum. Some people do more things, some people do less, but I think it's more in terms of an effort to operate
Uh-huh.
with less chemicals, um, and with more of a focus on soil health overall. So that's we've been doing that for years now, and that's really neat. That's the most satisfying part of ranching is seeing your
Okay.
land improve. So that's basically kind of my summary.
Yeah. So we will come back on the regenerative because I think it's okay. Thank you. I said we will come back on the regenerative ranching or farming because I think it's a very important topic. But for my first question, I wanted to ask you this one. So for a number of years now, we've seen the ketogenic and the carnivore diet becoming more and more popular among the public. But usually this nutritional option is most of the time spoken about in terms of what it brings on the health and scientific aspect, but a lot less in terms of the meat production and more specifically people who produce the meat, the ranchers. So, do you have the same feeling, or do you think that you get enough support from the, let's say, the animal based community? Is there space to increase the interconnection between this specific category of consumers and the producers?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I had an interesting experience that would speak to that. So we were invited to a convention that was basically a carnivore based convention, and we were the only grass-fed, grass-finished operators there. And I thought it was really interesting within the carnivore community is the conversation was just around meat, but there was no conversation, there was no distinction within the quality of the meat. And I thought that was very surprising when I talked to some of these very high profile influencer doctors in the carnivore community. They just, they were basically telling me that, yeah, meat is meat. And our data suggests that there's a huge difference in the quality of meat. And there was no conversation about the impact of the meat on the soil. And I think that I think the carnivore community, I think that conversation needs to evolve as far as, our data shows there's a huge difference in the difference in meat and how it's raised, and the impact that animals under different management strategies, their impact on the land.
Okay, and what would be these differences in your views and practice?
So it's basically the difference in there's a lot of different metrics, but the omega 3 to 6 ratio, I mean, our omega 3 to 6 ratio is around 1 to 1. Also, the phytonutrient density. Most CAFO fed animals, there's very little phytonutrient density within it. And the way that works is the more you are what you eat, people are what they eat, and so is an animal. And so, based off of the
Mhm.
diversity of a cow's diet, if they're in a feedlot, they're getting a very limited diversity of their diet, versus if they're out eating rangeland, they have a much broader diversity within their diet. And so you have all these metabolites that are held in different plant species. And so these metabolites are absorbed by the animal when they eat them, and then also stored in the fats. So it stands the reason that the more diverse the diet, the more of these phytonutrients are going to be stored in the fats. And it's a relatively new. It's a real People haven't really been looking at the phytonutrient density for a very long time, so it's fairly new, but it's
Mm.
it's real, and it's there. And the the scientists are just now beginning to understand what effects those have on the human body, but we know it's real, and we know it's there. And the interesting thing is, the healthier the soil that an animal is raised on, the healthier that animal, and the higher the health benefits are going to be within the meat.
Hmm. Because I think the assumption of many doctors in the carnivore community is to say, if you can have the higher qualities, of course, better, but if not, it's still better than pasta. Is that what
Correct.
they are
Yeah.
saying?
And I would agree with that. I mean, if you're eating grains, sugars, and ultra processed foods, a McDonald's hamburger patty is going to be a better alternative to that. But in terms of, human optimization,
Hmm.
that's really what we're talking about, is splitting hairs. There should be a distinction between the two.
Yeah, I agree. And but when it comes to the production itself, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. Could you tell the audience what would be the difference between a regenerative farming or grazing and the more standard way of growing cattle, and why regenerative grazing is such an important thing? I would say maybe for the planet, but at least for any region.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really two different models of production. The large industry standard of production within the United States, it's basically it's built on the a capitalistic model that relies on lots of inputs, farm equipment,
Mm.
chemicals for growing feed, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, soil amendments, and then also moving those animals to large confinement operations, where antibiotics are necessary to keep animals healthy. And the regenerative strategy is more stepping back and saying, okay, how does nature work? Let's limit the amount of our inputs. We know our yields are going to go down, but it's all about minimizing the costs and actually building soils versus the commodity model is based off of extracting from the soils and not putting anything back. Because at the end of the day, the
Mhm.
only way to build soil is you have to leave something, because the soil's alive. It's
Yeah.
full of bugs and microbes and so many things that we don't even know how much, we don't know the extent of what is alive in the soil, because we don't have the tools to look at it and
Hmm.
properly quantitate it. We just know that it's huge. Um, I've heard that there's more life in a handful of soil than there is in all terrestrial life on the planet. You know,
Hmm.
so it's kind of like looking at the stars and saying how many are there. It's the same thing looking at the soil, but almost in reverse. And taking in, but you have to feed it. You have to create the environment for the microbes and all the small things to survive. The commodity model is basically only focused on yields. How much,
Hmm.
how can I increase my yield so I can put more money in my bank? And it's very expensive. And the regenerative model is, how can I take care, not focusing on yields, how can I build my soils so that they'll feed me in the long run, and
Hmm.
clean the water and bring the wildlife back. And yeah, but they're just two completely opposing views of production. One serves the capital model, and the other serves nature.
Hmm. So uh, I will ask you something more specific on that note. But before, for whoever wants to dig more into this topic, I think you can read this book from Alan Savory, which explains that kind of model, even if it's not necessarily always related to farming, but at least to regenerating the soil. So, Richard, what would you say, or
Mhm.
how would you educate? What would you say, or how would you educate people who are claiming very loudly that cows are destroying the planet through the farts, releasing CO2 in the atmosphere?
I mean, I think it's pretty short-sighted. I really
Uh-huh.
do. I mean, there's plenty of data out. Maybe somebody could argue that 2 years ago, but there's been so much data produced now that we can show that properly managed animals in regenerative. Hey, hold on one second, guys. I'm doing a podcast, so Dad, I'm I'm in the middle of something. Sorry. Um,
Okay.
Animals that are raised in commodity models, possibly. I mean, I don't know, but the data shows that animals raised in a regenerative setting, they put more carbon back into the soil through the manure and the relationship they have with the bugs and the native
Mhm.
ecology, that carbon offsets by quite a bit the amount of methane that they actually produce. So at this point, I mean, it's just, do you want to accept the facts or not?
Mhm. And what about the water consumption? Because we hear that cows are using so much water.
I mean, out here, it's like there's creeks and there's rivers and there's springs, and it's like that water's, it's here, right? We're not taking it from one source and diverting it
Hmm.
to another. It's already here. And say, so a cow drinks some water and then she pees on the, or they pee on the ground. Like, it goes back into the soil. It's not
Hmm.
like it's just, it disappears. And I think one of the big when we start talking about production and where it gets really messy is, when it comes to feeding an animal grain, inherently, I don't think the animal consuming the grain is what is necessarily bad, even though the byproduct of that is you're going to have the less nutrient dense meat product. But the
Hmm.
act of growing that grain, right? That's a monoculture. And to
Yeah.
to raise hundreds of thousands of acres of corn, like, you have to spray for the weeds. You have to till the ground. And so the act of raising the corn Um, it's just one step removed from the cow, but that production model is what supports the big confinement operation model.
Hmm. And how do you understand or see this whole anti-meat propaganda or agenda? I don't know.
The anti-meat, I mean, different strokes for different folks, and enjoy your vegetables. I mean, I don't know. I don't really. I just try to mind my own business, but I think they're just completely misinformed. I mean, I live in the
Mm,
middle of Wyoming, and if you didn't eat meat, let's look back in time. How did we evolve? 200 years ago, if you lived where I live and you chose to only consume vegetables, you just die. Like you wouldn't survive.
mhm. Yeah, it seems very logic, but when I say the propaganda, I also mean in terms of politics and certain decisions to the political level to encourage less meat and more plant-based.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I think there's so many games being played on people and you know, money. The one thing we know about politics is there's always money. There's always money
Mm,
involved. And so
yeah.
people have shown that if they can make some money, they'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll skew results. I mean, they'll have their own scientific studies done. I just don't think you can believe it. I think at some point you gotta go with your own gut. Quit
Hmm.
believing what the masses are telling you, and like what's your truth. And so it just comes down to what makes sense, like what's logical. Um, and I think
Hmm.
that's the best is like maybe in the Caribbean or more temperate areas, you could survive off of plants. But in anywhere along our latitude, you would not survive. And
Hmm.
historically, people have colonized the world and have lived in cold environments where the ground is frozen for months and months. And there's only one way they were able to do that, and that's by meat consumption.
So at the beginning, you said that you were engaged into a more maybe standard way of growing cattle, but and then you switched to a regenerative farming 15 years ago, correct?
Yeah,
Okay, but from an economical perspective, does regenerative farming cost more or less money for you guys?
it costs less. I mean, we sacrifice, our yields aren't as high. We don't
Mm,
produce as much as we used to, but those costs, the loss of the net of our profit is balanced out because
so
we've
much, yeah.
stopped spending so much money on all the chemicals and the equipment, and it's very, very expensive. It's labor intensive and very capital intensive to produce in the kind of the widely accepted commodity norm. And
Mm,
so there's a period of time, like if you start switching up your practices, you'll see changes in the first year, but it takes 3 to 4 years to really kind of get things straightened out and get your biology healed to where you really
mm,
start seeing differences. I mean, with what so over the last 4 years, we've been doing soil testing on our irrigated lands, and we've increased the organic matter by 2.4% just in 4 years. So prior to that, we can tell that in 60 years since we've taken care of this land, we increased the organic matter by 1.5% above what it
wow.
just naturally is. So just in 4 years, we've more than doubled our organic matter. And if we're
Mm,
just looking at one metric, what does that mean? So one acre, an increase of 1% organic matter equates to, it creates a sponge in the soil. So when you do have a rain event, which we're very, very dry out here, we only get 12 inches of rain of moisture annually. So a 1% increase in organic matter. Now your soil has the capability of storing 20,000 gallons per acre. And so
Mm.
that, a 2.4% increase on all of our acreage, our irrigated acreage, that means we can store 27.8 million gallons of water more than we could 4 years ago. And so
Yeah.
that's just one thing we're looking at. But like the wildlife, the pheasants, the deer, all the animals, like they benefit from it. We haven't done any, counts, but you can just see it. And
Mm.
the interesting thing is if you're paying attention and you're part of the land, like you can feel the difference. Like my fields, they feel healthy and
Mm.
and and like they're operating more productively. So
Okay.
there's a bit of a lag, from the time you first start implementing practices. There's a period of time, a window before the soil has to kind of straighten itself back out and heal itself before it starts
Mm.
firing up again.
Yeah, transitions are always the most difficult
Yeah,
time. But do you feel this is something that more and more farmers or ranchers are willing to engage in, regenerative farming?
it's growing. It is growing. I mean, really, what we need to see financial incentive. If you want to motivate people, allow them to make more money, doing
Mm.
doing a certain practice, and that's been slow. Um, there's a lot of people claiming that they're doing this or that, but at the end of the day, that highlights another problem within the industry, which is, affidavits and people affidavits that allow people to greenwash product. I mean, you
Mm.
think about organic food products. And in 2000, in the year 2000, I think they found that 54% of organic labels were in non-compliance. So we've allowed for this game to be played by corporate agriculture, that because the consumer wants to trust what they're buying. And
Mhm.
so the only way they if you don't know your farmer and your rancher, the next best thing that humans have created is, hey, we're going to make a claim. We're going to say that it's organic, or that it's all natural, or whatever, grass fed, grass finished. Well, all that really means is that somebody signed a piece of paper and said, okay, it's this. And
Mm.
the checks and balances are pretty limited. Maybe they come out once a year to look at your operation. Maybe they come out once every 3 years. It depends on the program. So, it's a trust model that has historically just been kind of cannibalized by corporate America, because they just want to make money. They've shown their intention. They don't care about the land. They don't care about people. They want to make money.
Yeah. So right now there are no subsidies if you engage in regenerative farming.
I mean, there's some things that are kind of there's some programs that are trying, but they're not coined as regenerative farming. I mean, it's still the commodity norm is really what is being pushed on scale.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, in certain countries in Europe, we can see huge difference of income between cereal and cattle producers, where cattle producers are facing so much difficulties, to very fatal points sometimes. How is the situation in the US?
I mean, it's just it's a commodity market, right? So it's
Mm.
some years it's up and some years it's down, and so you can't count on it. Right now, cattle prices are at an all-time high. I mean, it's which is amazing for the ranchers, but it it doesn't make sense. Um, with the price of meat in the grocery store, the only thing that, I mean, the commodity packers. So there's four big players in the processing industry that control 86% of the beef processed and killed in the United States. And I mean, I've ran the numbers, and they're losing money. They have been losing money because the high input and onboarding costs to buy cattle, they're very expensive. And the
Hmm.
price increase we see at the grocery store doesn't reflect what those cattle cost. So they're losing money. And they're not too concerned about it. You know, these big packers, they've controlled the industry for so many years that they have billions of they're sitting on such a long cash runway that they can
Hmm.
afford to lose money for a long period of time. And so the rancher part of me is excited. Cool. You know, we can sell our cows for a lot of money. But then on we also have our own meat business and we sell the meat. Well, if I have to pay more to compete with the commodity market for cattle, if I have to pay more to onboard that animal onto my program, then I cannot lose money. I don't have billions in capital to, soak up the losses. So I have to raise my prices to the consumer. And so what we see happening right now is, I believe it's just a long-term strategy. You know, these big corporations, they're looking years out. And so they say, hey, if we lose money for the next the next year, you know, say 4% of the independent processors, they're not going to be able to outlast us, and they'll go away. You know, they'll fall out of the marketplace. And so a year from now, the big packers will consolidate a percentage of the market share and just be one step closer to, more control of it.
Hmm. And are there a lot of, I mean, a lot, are there many ranchers who, I mean, we see that, for example, I live in Switzerland, but I see it in France a lot. They stop ranching or growing cattle at some point. Like a
Yeah,
lot of them are, you know, uh, closing their business.
yeah.
Is that the
No, that's
same situation?
that's the same trend here. People either have to get bigger and buy more land and produce. They have to be farming or ranching across more acreage under the commodity model to spread out the high input costs of, say
Mm,
a tractor that costs $750,000. You need more acres.
yeah.
And so the trend, I feel like, we went from 1.7 million ranchers in the 1980s to like 700,000 ranchers, currently. And so that there is a trend that is, it's pretty disturbing when you look at, food production and realizing that, man, having a stable food source is like one of the most important things in terms of national
Mhm.
security. If you're not well fed, you have a
Yeah.
problem, you know?
Yeah. And but as every job, of course, has its own difficulties. But as you are feeding people, what would be the main, let's say, I mean, you've just talked about it, but what would be the things that the public should be aware of in order of not being negatively impacted themselves later?
Support somebody local, you know?
Hmm.
Support somebody that is trying to take care of the soil. Pay them what they're asking, because just because beef is cheap at the grocery store doesn't mean that's what it actually costs. And
Mm.
if the producers aren't, if the farm, at the end of the day, if the farmer and the rancher cannot be profitable, um, year in, year out, like you're contributing to the destabilization of the people that actually raise the food and falling into this trap of, corporations are going to control it.
Hmm. Because I think that not many people are aware of the amount of work that it requires. Uh, I mean, I remember one of the first exchange we had. I told you that to me, the lifestyle around ranching is very healthy, and I made a comment to you on Instagram, and I think you replied, but I think you, you replied to me that I could only see the nice part of it. So, do you think there's this gap between, a certain image that we see of the ranchers and the difficult or the huge amount of work that it really requires?
Yeah. I mean, this day and age, to be proficient in ranching, I mean, you have to wear so many different hats. One is you have to understand how to do the work, the physical work.
Hmm.
You have to know cattle, you have to know land, you have to know soil. You need to be able to predict the weather, be able to, audible and change a plan, completely change your plan. You have to be able to fix a tire. You have to be able to do some electrical, And so what I see in just like business in general is most of those skill sets has got a person that is dedicated to that. Well, within ranching is you don't have the capital. Historically, if you're working on a ranch, you don't make much money. So we can't compete with the rest of the world in terms of hiring high quality help. Most of the time people, and I'm not saying this in general, but my experience is a lot of people that are in the ranching world, like they need a life coach more than they need a job, you know,
Mm.
because there's not much money there. So people that are seeking money, they go into a different profession. And that's just on the work side of it, but the physical work. But then you have to understand your margins, and you have to understand your costs and insurance and taxes and all the things. So you have to be fairly proficient at everything that the running the business encompasses. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we're kind of facing right now with our children is, so the price of land has gone through the roof. So there's this big block of land that has this assessed value of, millions of dollars, but we have
Mm.
no interest in selling it because like you said, being on the land and working it, being a steward of the land, like it allows you to learn a lot about yourself through the challenge and the struggle. But with the children, we have to figure out a way to be able to entice them to stay here. Like there has to be a certain quality of life that competes with the commodity norm. There has to be more upside to downside, or these kids who've grown up working, they know how to work. They're hard workers. They're just like they're going to be highly sought after in the rest of the business world. And so we have to balance the comfort, some comfort for the kids to keep them to stay, because the land is a legacy, but we have to be better at supporting the family and the children to keep them here, because at the end of the day, the people, um, and the leadership that's making the decisions on the land, that's every bit as important as the soil itself.
Hmm. Because that's what we see here in Europe as well. I mean, many children often do not continue after the parents are retired, and or out of 5 or 6 children, maybe one will continue, but not the way it used to be 60, 70, 80 years ago, when like the family would mostly continue the cattle raising
Right.
business.
Right.
So do you have children, Richard?
Yeah, we have
How
three
many?
boys.
3 boys. And that's another topic I would like to touch with you. um, I feel many people would be scared to leave the city and move to the countryside, let alone a ranch. So how is it to raise children on a ranch?
It's amazing. Um, I feel the exact opposite. I would be scared to leave the country and raise kids in a city. I mean, we don't have to lock our doors. We don't have to worry about, other people. Uh, we don't have to worry about the human dangers of living in the
Mm.
city. Um, and it's amazing because the kids, they're allowed to spend their time outside. They learn so much, working on the ranch with animals and equipment and it's interesting because all the kids, we have three boys, but they're all so different. And each one of them has got, a skill set that they like, and some of them are welders. Some of them just like to go for long walks and look at the animals and think. And some of them like to run motorbikes or all of the above, So there's such, to be able to see living on the ranch and how it helps these kids develop their creativity rather than everything just being a prepackaged narrative like, hey, play this game, here's the in within this box. If they're outside, and participating, like they have this, it has an ability to bring out the creativity in the kids and pique their interest.
I see. So, do you feel that the urbanization and the fact that a lot of people left the countryside 60 years ago and moved to the cities more and more have made human beings lose a part of themselves in a way?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, if you can't see the stars at night, or you don't see animals, like we are dirt. I mean, we're dirt. We are the sum total of all the food that we have created, and that's why your hands are bigger and you've grown. And so all of that has an effect on your psyche and your clarity and your human growth. And if you're disconnected from that, you're disconnected from what you really are, which is nature. We humans like to look at themselves as we're different than nature, or we're separate from it, we're smarter than it. um and that's like, it's so far from the truth. Like, we're
Hmm.
just we're just an animal that has this crazy computer on top of our shoulders that we can think and analyze and solve for X. But like, at the end of the day, we are what we eat. We're the elements, that are contained within the soil.
Hmm. And I guess you are working a lot. How many hours per day are you working?
Right now, I don't know. I mean, we just there isn't really there's no weekend, you know. When we're tired, when you've hit the wall, you rest. But there's always something to do, always.
Hmm.
So
But
like within ranching, to be a proficient rancher, you have to be really good at selectful neglect, because you have such a long list of things that need to be done, and so you're always just prioritizing what needs to be done now.
but even though you're working a lot, do you ever feel this kind of stress that most people are, I would say, dying from in a way?
So reframe that.
Yeah, I said even though you're working a lot, because a lot of time people are relating stress and work, workload and stress. But
Mm.
even though you're working a lot, do you ever experience this kind of, like chronic stress?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the challenges of the day and of the, that we're constantly looking at for the future. I mean, you always live in stress. Like, we
Hmm. Yeah,
just
of course.
always stress. And I look at that as, for one, as I love the work. Like, I almost feel like I like stress, because I look at stress as kind of the forge that I willingly walk into. And no matter what the issue is, you're going to get through it. If you've willingly walked into the fire, you know, time after time after time, and when the challenge first presents it to yourself, you have no idea. Like, initially, you're like, I'm not gonna. How am I gonna get through this? But if you just keep going and working on it, you always get through it. So with that being the pattern, like, I'm not afraid of anything. Like, I'm not afraid of a challenge. You just have to have faith. Just because you don't have the answer now doesn't mean it's not there, because history repeats itself, and you're going to find a way. You just may not see it yet. You just have to put one foot in front of the other, keep going, because it will be there. You'll
Yeah.
get the answer you need when it's time, but you can't quit. You just have to keep going. And so
Yeah.
that's I think that's fun. That's like a fun mind game to play with yourself. Is like, all right, I can do hard things. Whereas, there's a part of everybody that, like, we really just want to seek comfort. We want everything to be okay. We want to be taken care of. We want to just know that. But if you ever reach that point, there's this, you've lost a sense of purpose. And we
Hmm.
need a sense of purpose to keep pushing us, because I believe that the whole point, and this is like, deep, pretty deep, like one of my deeper thoughts, but I believe that the purpose of life is who you become. Like, that is your life's work, is who you become. And there's no better way to excavate that than to do hard things, because it's all about what you learn in the process of doing physical things and mental things. It's what you learn that changes you, and that helps to mold who you become as a person.
Yeah. So do you, my question is, my next question would be, if someone wants to leave a city and start a ranching business or a ranching activity, what would be the main advices you would give to that person?
You better have a lot of money.
Hmm.
I mean, first of all, the capital investment, it's just not feasible to say that you're going to quit your job, go buy a piece of land. Okay, go buy a piece of land, buy all the operating equipment you need, and then just so that you can start to learn. It's just not feasible. Like, you're not going to be able to support yourself. I mean, if you're just looking to do like a homestead, and you're not looking to make a living off of it, and you're willing to, soak up those costs for a multitude of years. Yeah, it's feasible. But I mean, like, right now they say that the average kid in high school, of all the kids in high school right now in the United States, 80% of them will never own their own home, because they're not going to be able, they don't, it's so expensive, and you're competing with, people that are millionaires and billionaires that already, they're going to transfer that wealth to their children. They're going to teach their children how to play the game of money, right? Because the game of money is a game. I
Hmm.
know really wealthy people, and they have a team of people that they hire to make sure that their money is making money. And, kids that grow up and go out on their own, first thing they've got to do is they've got to figure out how to make a car payment. And then they got to figure out how to make a house payment. And then, have some kids, or, it's just, the wealth gap is the wealth gap is something that, and I'm not a political guy. I'm on Team Human. And, that right there is one of the biggest security threats to people that I think there possibly is. And I don't see, you know, either side, the Republicans or Democrats, left or right, nobody's really addressing that, you know, and because it's messy, people there, it's just so complicated. But it's definitely a real problem. So I mean, if you're trying to start out and do something, along those lines, first thing you do is go work for somebody. Go collect a mediocre paycheck to learn some skills, and at least learn in, because you can read all the books, but until you've actually done it, like, you're
Hmm.
not going to have any idea. You may know how the numbers work, but when it comes to the physical realities of, like, what it means to feed a cow when it's 30 below out, or, what you do when a calf is prolapsed and it's trying to have a baby, or, there's just so many different variables that, it takes a lifetime to learn.
Yeah. And in France, I think the milk producers, they've done many years ago a lot of kind of we call it cooperative. Like they get together and they produce, with a better cost, and they can sell more, etc. Do you think that would be a way for new ranchers to come together and do it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always strength in numbers, and many backs lighten the load, type of idea. But that's also tricky. You know, you've got to figure out how do you get people to get along first. And,
Mm,
you're going to do that. Like, people have to have their egos in check. You have to be making long-term decisions that's based off of the good of the greater good, generational good. Like, most people are just looking at, like, are we going to make money today? Or are we going to be profitable this year? Or how's our crop going to be this month? But very few people are looking like, what is it? What are our decisions now? How does that shape what we're going to leave, 7 generations from now, or one
mm,
generation? And it's so challenging working with people because everybody has a different programming and a different perspective. And so get first addressing those issues within yourself, know thyself, figure your own self out. Don't lie to yourself. That's an onion that you're constantly peeling back. But finding like-minded people that say, hey, I choose to address those same things. And I think that's definitely the place to start.
mhm. So you say ranching would be more like a life choice than a job choice.
Yeah, yeah. The people that are ranching, the ones that stick in it, stick to it. It's because of the lifestyle, and a really crazy statistic is the lifestyle is amazing. You're outside, you're around animals. It's like as close to nature as you can get. Yet, the statistic is just blows my mind. It's like the suicide rate in agriculture. It's higher than any other occupation. It's higher than veterans. And you're like, well, why? Why
Wow.
is why is that statistic so? And it's like the only reason is like you have this amazing environment, but the reason it's so negative in that statistic is because of the financial pressures. Like it's so
Mm.
hard to be profitable in ranching, and it's just yeah, it's pretty wild.
So what you're saying, if I'm not misunderstood, that the people prefer to commit suicide than going back into a more normal city life?
I
Or
don't
no?
know if yeah, I guess so. I don't know if I can't speak to the exact
Mhm.
reason, as why people would choose that route, other than I think that they get so deep in debt and they can't see a way out, right? They can't see a way, they can't see the path through the darkness. Um, and the guilt and the shame of if you inherit a generational ranch and then you're burdened with the fact that it's you're going to lose that for generations to come.
Mm.
I think that's a heavy weight to carry.
Mm. Like the feeling of failure more
Yeah,
in a way.
failure, but I think the feeling of failure stems from the feeling of hopelessness.
Mm.
I mean, at that point, if you're one of those people that have taken that route out, like the only reason you would do that is because there's no hope. Hope is the worst of all feelings, hopelessness. And
Mhm.
that's a sad thing that has been perpetuated because it's just so hard to make money within agriculture, especially if you're trying to go against the grain, like what we're doing. We're going against the grain. We were doing regenerative agriculture before it was even called regenerative agriculture, before it was like, now it's kind of cool, and people are like, oh, wow, what is that? But um, you're just going against the commodity grain, and you're not rewarded for the effort. Like on our land, like the water that comes off of our land is clean. There's no chemicals in it, and that goes into waterways. But there's no funding, there's no reward for your practices. There's no reward for the amount of healthy, clean air that comes off of your fields. Um,
Mm,
there's nothing like that out there yet. So um, so
I see. But
hopefully time will change that.
do you think that a larger adoption of a more carnivore, animal-based form of nutrition will be something that could help to promote more awareness about the needs for small-size ranching or regenerative farming?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. To push to move the needle. But again, it comes down to the education, and the carnivore community needs to be asking themselves, what is the impact of the food I eat? Because you could be eating carnivore and you're feeling better, and good for you, like you're healthier. But what about the plant? What about the soil? What about the water?
Mm,
Because if you're eating grain-fed beef, you may be feeling better and metabolically more healthy, but you're still contributing to uh, you know bad bad practices that are you know hurting the land.
mhm. I see. So I know you're not a doctor, but I would really like you to, um, I mean, for you, what would be your recommendation to anyone who want to be healthier and, or at least your definition of being healthy?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor. I know can speak from my own experience is when we quit eating breads and sugars and processed foods, like you feel better. Like 100%. You have more
Mm,
clarity. Your joints don't hurt as like they did, you know. And so I'd say just don't believe what anybody tells you. Just experiment with yourself. Just quit
mm,
eating breads and sugars and processed foods for a month, and just eat meat and see what happens. Like you'll feel it. You won't be able to deny it.
mm. I see. So you said you have a local shop or you sell locally the meat. So
Yeah,
if
we've got
people,
a. Go ahead.
no, no, so if people want to contact you, if they'd like to buy from you,
Yeah, so we have a small restaurant in our town, but we're shipping beef directly across the United States, and our website is cartercountrymeats.com, and we post our soil data and our nutrient density data, so you don't have to believe us as far as like we say it's this or that. Like our numbers actually back it up.
and is this a growing uh, trend that people buy from local farmers, or you feel still it has improvements to be made?
Yeah, I think it's definitely growing. Um, is it the best model? I don't think so. I mean, it's really expensive to ship meat,
Hmm.
with boxes and dry
Yeah,
ice. It's costly. Um, but it's the only thing that we've found so far that is optimistic about insulating ourselves from the commodity market.
yeah, I see. Um, okay. Um, I mean, from my side, I've asked most of the questions I wanted to ask you. Uh, if there is anything you would like to add, please do so. And if you want to have the word of the end, it's yours.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, QC. I'm glad we were able to finally connect. And yeah, I just support local, support regenerative food, because by doing that, you're supporting things that you probably have no idea about in terms of water quality and soil health and how it all works together. And you're gonna have we've had carnivores who switched to carnivore because of their health issues, And when they switched over to higher nutrient dense meat, there's a guy by the his name's Jeff Toland, and he said, when I started eating your meat, he said I felt a higher level of health within my body, and I thought that was really interesting. But the data and the data backs it up. For people that are really in tune with their own bodies.
Hmm.
So yeah, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you a lot, Richard. I'm glad we could make this conversation today. And I will, of course, put all the links in the show notes related to your activity, your ranch, and other podcasts that you have done before. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Richard. All the best to you. Bye bye.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Bye.
You're welcome.